Thanks for coming. Oh, yeah, it's not very good for that, yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and start again. Our next presentation is by Zoe Shen, who's a Director of International Operations for Horizon Survey Research at Beijing. And the title of her presentation is The Subway Culture and Advertising Culture in Chinese Cities.
Hello, everyone. Actually, I'm very excited about to go through all the previous fantastic presentation done by our printers. I'm very excited because Sue said you are so interested in about China, what happened in China, and how you can understanding, through different approaches to get more better understanding about China. And I don't know whether it's Stephen's deliberate intention to put me at the very last second presenter. If you have more questions about China, but I think it's really challenging for me. And one of my American friends told me there is a saying in the United States, and it is said that if you got 1 week to visit China, it would like a newspaper to you, since you have lots of headlines to read, the Forbidden City, the Summer Palace, maybe the Great Wall. And if you got 1 month to visit China, it might be turning to like a magazine to you, because you will got lots of chance and you will read lots of stories. And if you got more than 1 month staying in China, maybe you feel it's like a novel to you, since you will find it totally ununderstandable to you. It's too difficult for you to understand what is really China means to you. Because some days maybe you think, oh, maybe it's about China. What is happening in China today? And maybe 2 days later you will find something totally different as what you have experienced, in different places. I think it's great things we have done in the past 30 years. We really stand economically, in the past 30 years, we make great changes for China people's life. But still, it's not obvious. We still leave lots of contradictions and big gaps in the big countries. So today, actually, I only have 45 minutes. It's a very short journey, right? So I will try my best to do so, where we can learn something through our subway culture and advertising, in Chinese cities. And actually, this is really talking about our key findings from the research we just done in this early year. On the left hand, there's the metro symbol from Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Nanjing, which we just found our survey. And in the right hand, you can see all of the symbols from all of the world, maybe Europe cities, maybe United States. I don't know what's your sense when you see these pictures. You think they are more similar, or you think they are more different? And if you catch sight separately when they are in the cities, when you want to looking for subway, can you really understand what is this meaning to you? So today, my presentation is mainly about 3 parts. I think it's better for me to give a very brief background information before I go to the real part, our key findings. And the second, I will talk about the citizens' attitude and the behavior in subway. And the last is about metro advertisements. So the background. By the end of 2008, I think if you want to have a whole sense about the total length of the metro lines in China, actually there are 776 kilometers in China. I mean, all the length the metro you can find. And there's about 12,000 kilometers in the United States. And if we get a chance to think about what really happened, what people they have contributed such maybe about 2/3 length of the unit people do in the past 100 years. Because, even though we have our first lines in Beijing about more than 35 years ago, but most of our subway is built in the past 10 years. So if you think, where's the laser? This is between the 1965 to 1978. In this time, actually, I should say, most of our subway, the key concept for the subway system is national security oriented. It's not for the public service use. And in the second stage, before 2008, you can find the subway in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou. And actually, sometimes some third or second or third tiers, they have some kinds of the subways. And in the past 10 years, 2000 to 2010, actually, you can find totally 29 metro lines in about 10 cities. And actually, more cities, more of them is still in the metropolitan cities in China. And if we want to forward to see what will happen in the future, actually, 2 years ago, when we have talking about the economic crisis, both not in the United States and also spread out globally, the people, our governments, they invest really a lot about to push out our economic needs. So actually, in the follow up the 5 years, maybe you can find there will be 79 metro lines, and in 22 cities. So what is mainly in the first stage, from the only one line, and then we spread the metro system almost in only 10 years. And sorry, if we see there is give you some data about some little bit more detailed, and this is also data by the end of the 2008. So even though we see in Beijing they are about 200 kilometers, and Shanghai is 236. Guangzhou is about half than Beijing and Shanghai, and Nanjing is a little bit shorter than the part 3. But actually, Beijing, they really do a lot of job in past 2 years, even in 2009, 2010. So now, if you go to Beijing, maybe I think the length is probably the same in the Shanghai, where you can find more. And let me just focus on this, the data in red. Maybe you still remember Anru mentioned the Taiwan people. They about maybe I remember right, about 80% people they still prefer to use their private vehicle in the daily life, and this is the highest single day passenger the metro system deliver one day in these 4 cities. So in Beijing, there's 4.9 million people. And in Shanghai, it's 4.42. And in Guangzhou, is 2.76. And in Nanjing, is 370,000. So if you have to put this real data in your mind, you compare, maybe one day it deliver the whole population in Houston, maybe Minnesota, maybe in the country population, maybe in somewhere else. So that's what really happened in the local context. We're talking about the real local context. And this is the real map in Beijing city. It's not that globalization about what you can see in our poster for our conference. But if you see, this is the first line in Beijing, see? And the second line. So actually, before 20 years, we only had these 2 lines, the first one and the second one. It's just a circle and a cluster on one line. And if I put this map, I don't know how many people of you have this, what is really on this map? Anyone have an idea about what is on this map? I think there's some people from China, right? It's the map of Forbidden City. See, so about 20 years ago, almost actually the blue line is we call it the second ring China. It's just little more larger what is under the Forbidden City, so the real heart in Beijing, capital city. And if you see what has happened, this is we have done in 1999. We do another very long metro to connect the suburban area to the downtown area in Beijing. And then 2003, we got another circle for the people to can get spread on the fourth ring. And then before the Olympic Games, we really do a quick job, And even in that year, we have the approach, to connect you together with the international new airport in Beijing. And that's it. And what is Shanghai? Shanghai, also you can tell from the image, it's a very have a broad coverage on the ground. And actually, I think it's very convenient for you to take it. So 2,000 years. Actually, before 2,000 years, there are also really main two lines in Shanghai. But they do lots of intention work, Maybe they don't build a new line, but they do lots of intention work across accompany our urbanization. The city centers brought people more and more to far away. And this is in 2004. I just give you some, quick image about what has happened. What quick job China people have done, even in the subway system. And Guangzhou, we have our friends from Guangzhou city, right? It's a right one, right? I didn't go the wrong one. And you can see Guangzhou, they have the first line in 1997. But in 2002, 2005, and also 2010, we get a new line, and we also get an extension about the line 2. That's what happened in Guangzhou. That's it. So Nanjing, it's the most latest one, among our 4 survey cities. But actually now it's already have, also they got some extension work about line 1 and line 2. You can see it. So what they have done, the first line in 2005, and it's 2010 they done it. Got some kind of connections. So that's what happened in the 4 cities we do our survey. So if you want to have a quick big picture about what has happened about when we're talking about the subway culture, actually it's very easy for you to understanding. Before the among the first age, we really have nothing. You just can take the subway as a transportation tool. You couldn't find anything else when you take subway, right? It's just a tool for you. Maybe make your life more easier or something like that. But I think before 2000 years and after that, so you can find lots of commercial advertisements when they're in the entrance or maybe on the hallway, and maybe just when you get it in the carriage, you can see lots of commercials advertisements also of the PSA. I just learned this word from this morning. Public service advertisements. You can see it's all over, the subway. And I think the 2008 when we have the Olympic Games, it's really give another big trigger, because when we done this subway during this special period, the government also make lots of special design, connected you with the special the idioms and maybe the fields with our local culture and the Chinese culture. So you can find a very traditional symbol and the cultural designs in the subways, the rooms. So this is I give you a very brief background about what is really happening in China. So when we do this survey, I think it's a really important question for us to understand. In our public's view, so what does the public space really mean to them? It's just a transportation, it's just a transitional subway, because we have lots of connected approach on the ground. And maybe people, they can even expect some other experience when they take a subway. Or it's just something they have to avoid the traffic jam on the ground, you see. So Actually, when we do the survey, we also go to the different cities, go to the in the rush hour to take some pictures, and we let some people, they really take the the subway system every day. So there is a citation from our interview. This is a girl. She's a nurse and 26. She was in Guangzhou. She said, "I think the metro system now is not only a tool of transport for people to travel, but also a good place for people to entertain and relax, where it can meet with you with the delicious food, the fashion books, recharging, and other that for the basic needs after a busy day, when you walk slowly to watch the people and the things around you in the subway, you will find it a very kind of enjoyment." Very romantic one, right? Very romantic, I should say. And you can see something just later on. So there's a different explanations when we put our choices in our questions. So mostly I think the metro system, they really makes our people, they think they make the cities more convenient, more comfortable, more advanced, and more modernized, maybe something like that. And we can, if we focus on these two questions, it's all about we can move fast and move convenient, right? And if we look at these choices, it's talking about sometimes I think it's more crowded and it's made me feel more dangerous. And I think it enlarged the city area. And also some people think it's increasing the job opportunities for our people. So that's the different, their points of view for when they mention about the subway system or the subways play what kind of role in a life or in a city life. And here we can see that it's all the real pictures. It's not done by Photoshop. It's the real pictures we do during our survey. This is a coupon machine. You can find it's very popular in Shanghai. Actually, sometimes during the rush hour, even the subway is really busy. You can find lots of people waiting in line to rush their cart, to get the coupon. Because when they get coupon, they can get lots of discount when they go to the different shops. And this is museum, really talking about to let people know more about the transportation, maybe the history. And it's the museum just in Shanghai's metro system, and it's open and free. And this is the metro shop in Guangzhou. You can see it's really, you can find different, the store may be very small, but it's really, on people's daily needs. And there's grocery stores, and you can find different things. And this is a bookstore. And this is, you can also find some, vendor machines for medicine. So if at night you need some machines, you can also find some, you can get some, medicines from this kind of machines. That is what these things you can find. So that's why we identified, so the metro system, their function, they are more economical and culture and entertainment gradually, emerges. Not only are something you can just avoid the traffic jams. And actually, when I came to the United States, because I just been here for 2 months, I really appreciated the United States people, the society. They show their respectation to the disabled people in every aspects of your public resources design. I'm really impressed by this way. And this is some pictures we took from the Beijing, the Shanghai, and Guangzhou. Also, you can find there kinds of provisions to make the disabled people make it more accessible when they want to also use the metro system, subways. This is the when they put the button, they can maybe flow on through this line. And this is how to say, people can use this umbrella. It's umbrella circle systems for free. So when you need umbrella, you can just use from this point. You can return it back at another stop if you want. And it's not very. Oh, it's just a emergency button. But there is let me see. Also, if you emerge some emergency systems, maybe you can just push the buttons here. And this is the special channel for the senior people when they take their subways. So, and this is also, you can find it's in Nanjing. It's a Brazilian for the blind people. When they want to use the system, maybe you can feel more easily to use such kind of device. To see. Okay, so if we focus on the metro space designs, actually, if you go to the 4 different cities, you can find different things, just as we mentioned formerly. This is what you can find in Beijing. The first, this decoration is done 30 years before, and actually, it's just a very decorated story about astronomy. Apparently, it's from the heritage from our history culture, but it's done before 30 years. And this is a platform that's newly finished when we have a stock called forest stock. So the people got very modern designs for you to connect it what is really happened, because underground it's a forest station. So just to make a very modernized designs for the hallway in the subway. And this is just done last year because the National Library, they did a very redo recreation of all the National Library Center. So underground, they also make new relief on the hallway systems. So when you came out this stop, you can really tell where you are. And this is all about the traditional books. You can have a sense about what the traditional books like you can find in China. And this is in the Ru station in Beijing. Actually, I think this is a very simple symbol to feel you can get a lot of entertainment when you got off in this step. And if you go to Shanghai, I think Shanghai is a really kinds of different designs, their folks. I think the merchandise and commercial culture plays more important role in Shanghai, because we get 2 notes from our interview. A very young age student, she said, the hallway in the picture in the link road of the shopping mall and the subway, which makes more convenient for me to get the shoppers. And it's not only convenient for the passengers, but also to reduce the chance that makes the mall more wet and muddy, especially in the rain days. Perhaps it also increased the popularity in the business district. Actually, when you go to Shanghai, they got a lot of basement shopping places directly connected to the shopping, connected to the subway. So when you get out the stop of the subway station, you can directly go inside into the shopping mall, and you can directly go, different kind of the shopping malls, upground. So we have a concept of that in Shanghai. When they design the subway system, the people very sophisticated because they can combine the commercial circles, both underground and also, connected to the subway. So that's the kind of things most Chinese people will do. And in Beijing now, if you go to Zhongguancun, if you go to the west part of the China, when they newly designed the subway system, they also do kind of the merchandise combination before the buildings and the subways. Oh, this is Guangzhou. Guangzhou is actually, if you go to Guangzhou, the hallway decoration is kind of more simple. But the government, they have very, I don't know, you think it's good design or bad design. This is all the name of the different stop. So overall, you can see they are the same style, but they are in different color. And they are in different, the characters. So even you're on the metro station, you remember how many people were together in the carriage? It's totally different, in the United States. Even you couldn't hear the people reporter which the stop now. You can easily tell where the stop outside. You can already, and then you can easily get up from the subway station. And this is also designed for the Zoom stations in Guangzhou. Oh, it's Nanjing. Nanjing, it's kind of like the Beijing, I think. You can find, because Nanjing, in history, Nanjing has taken place of the capital city for 6th dynasty. Actually, it's have a long, abundant of the heritage cultures in Nanjing. Even though the subway system is more later than in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, but when they constructed the subway station, they really put a lot of design to reflect their respect to the history cultures. So, whether people like the metro station or not, overall, you see, we got a very positive data, right? Almost 96 people, they said, yes, I do. And if you compare the different gender, you compare different city, you compare different ages, yes, we do, right? But let we focus on why they like it, okay? We give lots of choices. If you can see here, we give lots of choices. Why you like to take the metro system? You can find that the first one is convenient. It's made me feel more convenient. It's a good transportation. And the second, there's no traffic in the metro system. No traffic jam, sorry. There's no traffic jam in the metro system. And if you compare the percentage Beijing people they choose and Shanghai, Guangzhou, Nanjing, because Beijing is 82%, they choose this one. There's no traffic jam in the subway. And much higher, about 20% higher than the Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Nanjing. So in another way, you can say the more you prefer, the metro system, you see how difficult when you travel on the ground, see. And the second tier of the reason is talking about, the Conway mentioned, they think this metro system is very clean because most of them are newly, established. And maybe they feel safe when they travel through the metro system. And also, it's very cheap. It's also a very important thing. It's very cheap. And if you compare the, doesn't work now. If you compare the Beijing is 20%, 21% people, they choose the cheap price. The Shanghai, Guangzhou are a little bit 10% less than Beijing. But Nanjing people still choose focus on the prices. Actually, Nanjing's subway is not that long, than the Beijing and the Shanghai, Guangzhou. And in most of the cities, and I think it's globally the same, government commonly they give the subsidies to the subway constructions. And but Beijing people, they can travel all around through the metro system by only the one price. It's all the same. But the Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Nanjing, it depends on how far you want to go. And there is also very interesting things, in Beijing, there are 11% people said because where it's a places where can rest and sleep. That means you can imagine when they take a very long journey, what you can do in the subway. So it looks very interesting to me because one of the reasons of my husband, he likes to take taxi. He didn't like to take, driving car in Beijing, because when he get on the taxi, he can fall asleep. It's very safe, and you don't still focus on what's happening with the traffic jam. It's really tough for him. And if we take here the last question, the choices is all about your emotional experiences when you take on the subway. But we can see that there are fairly choices here. Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, when they're talking about whether you think you can meet with the happy and polite persons, and you think it's an interesting, enjoyable, experiences, and also we can feel very excited to take the subway. But Nanjing people, I don't know why. Maybe it's about the short history, comparing short histories, to contribute to the subway. They feel more excited and the more highly expectations they want to, take the metro system to make travel. Okay, so why people do not like it? Because too crowded. We give you they have provided with 8 reasons. And you can see there's high percentage of the first 4, too crowded, and still they think it's very expensive. And then I think it's bad air. Too crowded people, how can make a good air? It's impossible, right? And it's not that inconvenient. Because actually, I think in Beijing now, when the governments they do the urban planning, they not only focus on how you can expand your travels just through the metro system. They really combine the metro system and also the city bus system. They think about how you can make an easy connection and easy transfer between the different the transportation tools. Because we really have so many people to deliver. And the traffic jam is really the big headache for our governance in Beijing. Also, if we get a chance to give you some pictures, then you will see what is happening in China. This is Tiantongyuan. It's in the north part, a very big neighborhood, in Beijing. It's in the winter, and lots of people they just outside the entrance want to get inside of the subway system. And this is in the rush hour, very typical things you will experience in rush hour, daytime and the nighttime in Beijing and Shanghai. That's the people. But something seems very interesting is we got really different feelings from the local people and the migrants people and the foreign people. The local people said, the crowded people makes me feel very unsafe. You see, there are too many people. I think it's not safe. There are so many thieves and easy to touch each other. In the rainy days, the umbrella are easy to poke others. It's not good. It's a young lady from Shanghai. But we can see what this migrant said. Crowded people makes the easy feeling. I feel lonely where there's few people. In my opinion, more people, more safe. And I feel better because we're human beings, not the monsters. I knew few people here, and I feel alone when I am the lonely one, at my home. So there is also a traveler. He traveled from the United Kingdom. He said, although there are many people in the UK metro system, but it cannot be compared with what I saw in Beijing. If the people haven't been in China before, I think they must find it incredible what they see in these pictures. So actually, this is just to give you a sense. When we're talking about the public policies, how to distribute their public resources, is the local context is really the one key issue you should keep in mind. And you couldn't simply, make some comparisons when you've got some really the key issues, what it really happened in China. And it's really big challenges. So, and when we look at some behavior, so they like it, and what they do in the metro system. The first question we propose is whether you take the bus, the subway only by yourself, or you will take it with other people. So 77% people, they said they choose it alone. And another 22% of people, they said they prefer and go with the subway with other peoples. And most of them, they are the family members and they are the friends, you see. They still get a chance to go together. And if we make a comparison in different four cities, we can see Shanghai people, they give a little bit more higher percentage. They choose to take their metro systems lonely. And there is another notes. It's really different when you heard from my first notes. It is university students, 27 years old. He is in Nanjing. He said, in the 3 p.m. o'clock, when it is not the rush hour, there are not too many people in the subway. In the hallway, the passengers always show they are very busy. And the people only take the subway as transportation. They do not slow down and pay attention to the culture display in the subways. They just take a glance of the advertisements in the front of their eyes. We are rushed to come and go, and we're just passing slow. So it's a very different view. different young people. And if we took these, look at these different pictures, the lady is reading a book, and here the guy is, I think, really attractive, to his cell phone. Maybe play games, maybe send a texting message, you see, and some people, they're calling, make cell phones, and also some people, they're just focus on, the cell phone. And we can, if we compare, I just mentioned that we really, in the Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, the really big cities in China, it's the average daily flow, it's all, above the 3 million people. But if we look at what they're doing, so the first choice is about, send short message, making calls. The second number is reading, and then watch advertisements. Now the businessman will be very happy, right? And listen to music. Then again, sleep. And then you see it is blue. The blue item said chat with friends. And then they just dating, and also waiting friends and maybe chat with the strangers, very low, only 2.7% people. So I think there's something so very interesting that it's reminded me of kind of alienation, something like that. Because nowadays you think we really are highly technology, armed, right? We have the internet, we have 3G, we have the airport. So it seems that we have no reasons to feel boring anymore. We can always find things we want to do, right? Because it's really easy for you to connect it to the internet. You can do anything you want, any spots, in the airport, in the subway, maybe in the restroom. You can do anything you want, right? But when you have the sense about how many people, how crowded, in the subway system in China, does that mean the people, they will have more time or more respect or more focus on what's happening around them? I'm not sure whether you think it's only happening in China, because it's really the global issues by now with technology. Because when you just rushing, through the crowded peoples, you will feel just like the migrant people said they feel much more safe, and the local people said they feel much more unsafe. But even we not talking about safe, unsafe, are you think you're feeling more happier, or you're more excited, or you just hit what's the real crowded people around me every day? And when I learned something in the United States, because now my conference about the governance and the nonprofits, and one professor gave me a comment, I think very interesting. He said, because the people, they really have every choices to just fit their needs. So this also may be a kind of explanation why now young people, they pay less attention to join the community, to join the social lives around them. Also, I think you can catch that from the subway what happened in China. So this is the real things that I am interested in. And in Nanjing, it's very popular reading, Maybe if you go to Nanjing, you can see there's lots of people, just like a custom, something fashions. You can read in the newspapers, the magazines, just readings. It's a good time for reading. But you really need to read it when you take a subway, or it means you have no time to read when you get up. I don't know. I don't know. So last thing is about metro advertisements is that already spent lots of time. It's no obvious now our metropolitan area has become a huge advertisement media platform. You can find the PSA and the commercial HPs on their advertisements, and also there are lots of propaganda made by the governments, in different cities. And Home gave lots of data about the advertisements already in the morning, and also here it's talking about if you pay attention about the market share, the metro ads really occupied about 26, about the market share in the China. And even in 1 year, from 2008 to 2009, you can see the increases with 326%. What happened in the metro advertisements? And that is we can really find, some commercial, the advertisements very sexy, right? Even makes sense. When we see what the Japanese people did, they not created some sexy, but now you can find a very sexy commercial advertisements all over the big cities, and it's very visional, and very colorful. It's no secret that when people have a sense, because in their subway space, it's very narrow space, so they think the good strategy is you should put a very visual expressional ways to grab people's attention. But I think it's not only show that things, because we can see it's also really show the taste of the target people. And actually, Horizon, we just done a research about the 19th generation people, their culture, their values, their behaviors. And lots of high school students told me that I just like AirPod. I said, why? I just like IBM, advertisements. I said, why? And I said, because I couldn't understand what they're talking about. When they see some advertisements, they think it put me a little bit while I should thinking about, then I can really understand what they're talking about. And lots of advertisements you see, it's too boring, seems that, not innovative, not bringing you get some new ideas, get some new conceptions. So it's really also reflected our generations on their values and their taste. And this really globalized things. I think I can go this very quickly. This is what you can find in the Shanghai subway. It's the commercial system. And the Guangzhou still, they do some kind of propaganda things like that, and also the PS advertisement. And the Nanjing, you can find a very innovative, even it's a PAS advertisements. They do a very innovative way. Really, can make you think it's cool things. But we do ask about how often you read the advertisements when you see in the subways. Seems that these are very high. The coverage is really high. But if we ask for the reason, because the first reason is it really provided me something I don't know, provide me some information I need. And the second is the advertisement's really beautiful. It's really nice. And the last one is because I have nothing to do. I don't know what I can see. See, and the last one is it's just in the front of my eyes. So the business worker really do a great job. You see, they go to the niche where you can go. And if we compared, because this is what is in the carriage, and this is on the hallway, just in the subway. Even when people, they are on the subway, they can see what has happened, just on the world. And comparatively, the platform and the carriage advertisements, they get a higher folks because they spend longer times, right? It's very obviously. But we see that the people, they love public service advertisements more. If we see the market share, you remember the how big the commercial advertisements, and in the metro system, 80% is the commercial advertisements. Only 11%, is the public service advertisements. But if we ask people which one you prefer more, you can see 56 people. They think their PSA is much better, and there 33% people they think they like the commercial advertisements. So why? these things, some people said, because this commercial advertisements, they really give me the better, the virtual folks, and also they are good at the innovation ideas, and really provided the products which I just want to buy. And here is about the public service advertisements. They think the PS make a very good job in the idea, but I really suspect it. Do you think the PS really did a better job in the commercial advertisements? I have keep my my comments about it, because I think maybe you can go further about these questions. Does that show? Because we don't propose such questions in our survey, and maybe we can do it later. Maybe we can check. So when we relate advertisements in subway, does people think it's the places they prefer to see the public service advertisements? It's not the commercial advertisements, because maybe it's public room for them, right? Maybe Hongmei give you a lot of introduction about the Fox Media. Actually, Fox Media, when they do the concept, do a very good job business, about their 楼宇广告. I don't know how to translate it. But it's really a big debate in China, because the people think, okay, it's my room. You said you can put a TV here to force me to see what is happening, because when I'm in the elevator, I have nothing to do. I should see what is happening, all right? But it's my room. It's public room. How can you take this room to make it for money? So if we go further to identify people's expectation, what they want to see, what they exactly want to see in the public, in the subway, the metro system space, maybe we can have a more clearly sense. And if the businessmen, they have a more clearly sense to about the people's expectation, I think maybe can change the kind of the strategy when they put so much money when the subway systems, right? Okay, this it's the Lin Miaoke, the singing girl in the, yeah, it's really popular, after that. And why they buy the products, impressive, the products with high quality, because very fashion, because close to life, because I think it's worth it well. And this is all about the public service advertisements. Actually, most public service advertisements, the content and the main focus is about talking about, what you can do when you take a subway. You shouldn't, stay in line. You shouldn't drop off the trashes. So lots of them talking about that. But I think Stephen can give more about this. It's really different what happened in the United States. So if you follow up about people when they see these PAS, the advertisements, it's not really means they do what the advertisements want they do. Actually, it's also a problem we found in most of our surveys when Chinese people, they also show their positive expectation and their positive opinions. But if you compare with their attitude and their actions, you always can find the gaps between the two things. Okay, so why the people, they want to follow the PAS? It's about the personal demands. They think it can make our better life to live and work, and just response to the ads, and just follow it. And the one thing I think is interesting is something still told by our immigrants people interviews when they do the survey, because some migrants people said we couldn't see public service advertisements in our hometown. Maybe you can see Coca-Cola, right? In the most remote the places in China, but they couldn't see such kind of some advertisements in big cities, in rural areas. So they think it's kind of a gap, a part of the important life in city lives and in rural lives. So sometimes the migrant people, they even pay more attention to they like to read the PAS when they take subway. That's the data show. Even in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, the migrant workers, they pay lower attention. But in Nanjing, the second-tier cities, they really focus on about, they enjoy to read what is happening and what they're talking about in the PAS. Okay, so just some very simple conclusions. I think it's even it's a real narrow spaces, but reflect people's values, their attitudes, and feelings about their city lives. And something interesting is that even I think the city culture becomes more homogeneous. Can our subway culture could be more heterogeneous? So that's just my questions. Okay, thank you.
We have time for maybe just 2 short questions, and then we can also at the very end we'll have time for everybody to ask more questions. So, which ones?
I'll try to make this very brief because I'm thinking of the gendered space of the subway, especially when you're going back and looking at the responses to the negative of the subway, that it was a woman who said it was too crowded, that she didn't feel safe. And I'm thinking of sexual harassment and the rise of sexual harassment. And I can only think of Mexico City as the only subway system where they have cars designated for women at certain hours because of the sexual harassment of women in the subways. And so I don't know to what extent there is violence against women or sexual harassment is occurring.
Very good point of view. Very good point of view. But I think I should say you should think about still the local context. I think that the sexual harassment in the United States, even in the United States, I think maybe you can talk more openly, right, than in China, what happened in China. But I think even in nowadays in China, sexual harassment is not a very, open topic you can talk, So in our survey, we couldn't identify it through our survey. Yeah.
How many men are saying they feel unsafe in the subway, and how many women are saying they feel unsafe? Because unsafe is a term that they can use.
Yes.
There isn't a word for harassment. Safety is a term.
Yes.
Well, we can actually look at that.
Okay. Maybe we can go, further, the explanations about it from the interview in our surveys. Very good. Thank you.
Also, the people you survey, are they mainly young people? Because when I was in the Beijing subway in March, it seems like it's a certain subsection of the people. There are young, you don't have 80-year-old people or...
Actually, we cover people from 18 years old to, senior people. Because we do it as an incentive interview just in the metro system. So we really, focus on the distribution through different age of the people. So we have young people, we have middle-aged people, we also have the old-aged people. Yeah.
But she means that there are different riders, and the subways are mainly young people who ride the subway?
Yes. Actually, it's main people, they take, most of them are, young people and they're about middle ages. Not that much in the senior people, they take their subway system. That's right.
One last question.
Yeah, thank you. I want to know, is there any difference among the 4 cities in the proportion of immigrant workers who take the subway? Because I think that is a sign of whether they're integrated into the city life, the proportion of immigrant workers.
Actually, if we take the history about immigrant people in different cities, actually Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, they really have a long history than Nanjing. So that's why when they show their attitude towards the PAS, advertisements, actually the migrants people not that excited, because for them they just are very common things you already experiences in their city lives. But in Nanjing, so they are more excited feel about it. They think it's a big simple to division the differences life what happen in what their can experiences in the rural life and also in the city lives. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Okay, and I'll try and wrap up with my presentation, moving through it fairly rapidly. If we can go ahead and call mine up. Let's see. I think I need to do it myself. No, for some reason the mouse is not working. If I could get Damien out here to help, maybe that would help.
I was trying to do it for you.
Maybe do it for me? Okay. some reason it's not working. Bring it back up again and see if that works. Okay. Oh, he's doing it. Okay.
You want subway ads? Not that
Yeah,
one.
the one. SWS.
The other one. That one.
Yeah, subway ads. Okay, great. Thank you. And go ahead and call it up on the main screen. Okay, there we go. I thought I would just talk very briefly about some of the results of my own studies of these advertisements that we've, as I mentioned before, we started in 1998 with the advertisements from Beijing and Shanghai, and then we slowly added in Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, and even Kaohsiung for a few years. And I thought I'd give you a little bit of an introduction to, hopefully, if it's working. No, it's not. There we go. Just very briefly, I'm going to talk about how advertisements in public spaces vary across the localities between Asia and America, and then what's the relationship between advertisements and subway stations as public spaces. And then how do commercial and public service advertisements vary across these different cities with different political, economic, and cultural systems. In particular, useful, I think, to compare Shanghai and Washington, D.C. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit about just some future research things. A lot of the previous discussions had focused on the fact that we have very different approaches to understanding what might be the role of advertisements. And in general, I would say there's kind of social science approaches, which really see it as more just talking about reflections of broader universal trends and social change. The only thing I would add to that is that obviously they play a role in some type of collective identity formation. But then I would also add that one of the important things, if I can get this to come up, there we go. Oop. No, stop. It doesn't like to be bothered, apparently. Runaway ads. Well, we're going through them quite rapidly now. That's one way to save time. What's it doing?
See, I don't know. Let me just reset this box.
Yeah, I have a feeling it needs to be reset. Yeah.
I think the fighting over the control between the two.
Okay, no problem. But to come back to it, there's a big difference between social science approaches and humanities approaches. And in general, the humanities approaches or social science approaches seem to view them as merely reflections of broader trends. And also they are playing some type of role, largely an informational role, in shaping a collective identity formation. What groups do individuals belong to? So that's actually what kind of intrigued us initially about the advertisements, is they're asking people to join new groups. Could be local groups, could be a national group, or the one that interested us most was, are they asking people to think of themselves as part of a transnational Chinese middle class? That's one of the things we're most interested in. And then, of course, on the humanities side, there's more approaches which think about it more perhaps as a Habermasian notion of a public sphere. Is it contributing to the creation of a public sphere? Is it playing the role that newspapers and novels have played in centuries past in Europe and in Americas? Or is it playing a different role? You need to go back up to the beginning. Maybe one by one, get back up there.
All right, one through.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see if I can get back through it. How do I? There we go. Okay. Or we can think about Zygmunt Bauman's idea of the division of the world into vagabonds versus tourists, people who are locked into localities, versus those of us, and probably most of the people here in the room, would be people of a middle class who see themselves as capable of traveling throughout the world. So are these advertisements actually enabling some type of positive notions of identification, or is it actually just alienating people even more? And related to that is the relationship between, as we've seen today, having our experts talk about the different subway systems, and it also came out in our discussion of the surveys we did as well, that there is a relationship between the advertisements and the actual subway stations as public spaces. And it was something when we first started this project that we really didn't see the relationship. It's only when we began working on it and talking with different scholars and then actually observing people in the spaces, we saw that the subway spaces really are special spaces. They're not just intersections for transportation. They can be symbols of urban and national development, as we saw in Anru's talk this morning. They're symbols of global city status that she also mentioned. Or if you think of Saskia Sassen's work about what is a global city, for example, this would definitely be one of those symbols. Definitely a symbol of modernity or cosmopolitanism as well. They can also be political arenas. People use them to stand and to make protests, for example. It's an easy way to very effectively communicate with a lot of people. They're landmarks for psychological orientation. It's the first thing that a visitor to a city does is to get on the subway and travel around to try and get a sense of where you're going to go. And of course, migrants as well. This is how they become familiar with the city. And then, of course, it also can be used as for political terrorism purposes as well. And I won't go into details, but we think of the Tokyo gas attacks, for example, in 1995. And then finally, as a space for socialization and consumption. As Anru was talking about this morning, and even the survey showed, people actually hang out in these spaces. And particularly if there seems to be some type of a mall, for example, where people can actually go. Liao Binghui has done work looking at what he calls the Xinxing Renlei, the new type of advertising in the Taipei MRT mall, where you had advertisers working really closely with groups of young girls who would go there every day to kind of hang out. And so, all right, try it again. Okay. So just to back up a little bit, our survey of advertisements started in 1998. We added in all these subways. And then what we did was we just simply went around through the subway systems and went down and collected one photo of each ad that actually appears. And so we've got these thousands of these from 1998 to 2003 currently in our archive. We've also added in 2009. And we're working backwards, so we'll be able to have all of these on. And it will allow us to do long-term studies of the content. We've already done some type of various types of specific issue research, and I'll talk maybe a little bit about some of those. But it's already been useful for some things. And I think you'll see a lot of the scholars, for example, who are interested in, say, gender, or notions of nationalism or localism, or even just the growth of specific types of commercial products that are available over time. This archive will be useful for all of those. What I'm suggesting, though, actually is that we need to kind of distinguish a little bit about between the different types of advertisements. So I would actually propose that we actually have 3 different types of ads. First would be commercial advertisements directed at individuals and families. Second, commercial advertisements directed at corporations and governments. And I'll give you some examples about why I think they're quite different. Then finally, public service ads, which are mainly directed at individuals and groups. So let me give you some examples, but what I did was I compared Shanghai in 1998, 2005, and 2009 with Washington, D.C. in 2004, 2005, and 2009. And I'll go through all of these, but you can see there's a big difference. And these percentages are for the total number of ads that appear in these spaces during this time. And so Shanghai, for example, this is just an example from 1998, the largest category is almost always fashion and cosmetics. And you can see it's anywhere from almost 40% of all the ads to at least a quarter. Okay, so Shanghai is very much women's products, fashion and cosmetics. Washington, D.C., it's as much as 5% some years, as low as 1%. Okay, so Washington, D.C., not so big on fashion cosmetics, nowhere near as much as Shanghai. Shanghai food and drink is usually the second category, about 16 or 17%. Washington, D.C., much less, but still out there. Okay, and actually a lot of it refers to local eateries and groups. Entertainment is actually always consistently a fair amount of ads are directed towards that. Movies, ballparks, things like that. Maybe around 10% most of the time in Shanghai. Washington, D.C., it's very large. It can be as much as a quarter of all ads, because this category would also include all the ones for the museums. So all the Smithsonian museums, for example. There's a lot of events and conferences, music events, theme parks. I like using this example because this is a good example of using kind of local political imagery, right? So this is actually a water amusement park, but they've got a picture of, the Abraham Lincoln statue behind. So it's very location specific. This is actually very common in Washington, D.C., that interplay between political symbols and commercial symbols. They're used back and forth all the time. Shanghai household goods, always fairly substantial, 4 or 5%. Washington, D.C., almost none, and sometimes none at all. This is one for furniture store, and this is very rare. Shanghai communications and media products, as much as, from 8% to maybe 15%. This is actually, there seems to be more and more ads in this category. Washington, D.C., not so much, but also a very specific one. This is the Federal News Network, Federal News Radio Network. Very specific to the people riding the subway. Probably a very large percent, we don't actually know the actual percentage, but a large percentage of the people riding the subway are federal employees in Washington, D.C. Shanghai housing, okay. Washington, D.C., also not so many. And this one is actually Baltimore. Baltimore is advertising in Washington. So come live in Baltimore, basically. And what they're saying is, get a real house, basically. And not just live on a fire escape, right? Automobiles, transportation, this is increasing in Chinese cities, still only 2 or 3%. Washington, D.C., it also includes public transportation as well. And that's always a fairly good percent of the advertisements. Healthcare, it's actually fairly consistent, 5, 6, 7% in Shanghai. Now there seem to be more and more, I would say, cosmetic ads, cosmetic surgery. Hong Kong has an enormous number of these in very recent years. Washington, D.C., it's actually fairly low historically, but 2009, because a lot of them were dealing with the healthcare debate. So this is a good example of how, even in a commercial ad, you can have a campaign where something is just very, very important in a short period of time, can suddenly jump up and make it, there are ads everywhere. Education, okay, advertising for schools and universities. Already I've noticed in looking at some of the other cities around the world, this is a very large category in Kuala Lumpur, Ankara, and some of these other cities around the world. It's still fairly large in here, in Shanghai, but actually larger in Hong Kong. Washington, D.C., there's always people, and a lot of them are directed at federal employees trying to get a master's degree or to bump themselves up in some way. And this also is another example. So, oh, say, can you see a career change? Okay, there's just a lot of political rhetoric and political symbols worked into commercial ads in Washington, D.C. And then, of course, also the ability to deface, which is something which is always there as well. Financial and banking, this is increasing. It was very low in 1998. Now it's always 6 or 7%. There's a lot of banks that are advertising. Washington, D.C., that's always fairly consistent. This is for a federal credit union, for employees who work for a Department of Homeland Services. Employment, actually seeking people. This is also a very Washington-specific one. You can see it's like an African-American family, and it says, you always flew further, and this is, they're trying to recruit somebody to work for Boeing. Okay, so why is Boeing advertising in Washington, D.C.? They're poaching off of the Defense Department, basically, which is that, so we have employers poaching off of federal employees, and a lot of them who ride the subway system. And so you can see there's actually, just in the commercial ads consumed by individuals, there's actually a fairly big difference between Washington, D.C. and Shanghai. Then if we look at things that will be consumed by companies or governments, this is actually fairly small, maybe 1% or so, light goods and labor, advertising things for companies. Here it's office goods, office products. Washington, D.C., it's also fairly small. Here it's a glass that might be used in a company offices. Or Shanghai, capital goods, large expensive goods. And this I would count at the high-tech technology park outside of Shanghai. This is in 1998. Washington, D.C., there's always 5 or 6% of the ads for weapon systems. As far as I know, it's the only city that advertises weapon systems. But they're not actually, of course, advertising, buy an F-22 or whatever it is. But it's, what it is it's most likely going to be the fact that they know that riding the subway there are a lot of defense employees. That's for one thing. So they might be advertising something defense employees can buy. And so there's a lot of, accounting systems, security software, these types of things that employees actually have And I've also interviewed some federal employees who say that it's also depends upon the time of the year. And so they put out a lot of ads in the spring when they're getting towards the end of the federal budget year, when the people in the federal budget offices have to use their money or lose it. And so suddenly they'll pop up under the subway ads all these types of special softwares. And laptops, that's the other big thing too. Laptops will pop up because they're trying to cater to that. But it's also true there are a lot of tourists. And one of the things that tourists often do when they go to DC, if they're American, is they visit their congressperson, right? And so one of the things they might be looking for is what does my district do for me? Kind of thing. So this also could be why these defense companies are advertising, is to increase awareness amongst the people riding the subway. Advertising is also something that's also widely advertised. So consulting is another big area, and it can be as much as 10% in Washington, D.C. So this is one called Palantir. Okay, does anybody know what Palantir is? Yeah, it's a company out in California, but does anybody know where the name Palantir comes from? P-A-L-A-N-T-I-R? Oh, we have no geeks in the room. Okay. It's J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, right? The Palantir is the magic globe that you use to spy on your enemies and communicate with Sauron, the evil god. That's actually what it is, right? So obviously some geeks in California came up with it. And what it is it's a defense system. And you can see this is the Pentagon stop. Okay, and it's a defense intelligence networking system, but they gave it the name Palantir to appeal to, I guess, not people like you, in other words. And so, the last category is actually public service advertisements and goods, and kind of broke them up into different areas. What I think are kind of some very useful distinctions: health and sanitation. This is one against drugs in Shanghai. This is another one about in Washington D.C. This is as many as 15% of the ads. The total ads will be about health and sanitation. Here it's quit smoking. There's a lot of ones about diet, diabetes, AIDS awareness. These are all very, very common in the DC subway ads. Volunteer donations, giving money. Here's one in Shanghai from 1998, a philanthropic fund. Or here it's the USO. Okay, very common to advertise in Washington, D.C. because you have so many retired people who've left the military but are still working for the Defense Department, let's say. And they'd be perfect candidates to volunteer to help welcome soldiers. So it's very context specific, or kind of politics, justice, or patriotism. This is a very, I would say, typical Chinese political ads, about equality between men and women, okay? You can see it's got the national symbol, okay? It's got that look towards the future, and marching people of different backgrounds and everything. But then it's also got a symbol of Shanghai, in there as well. And one of the things I've actually done another paper going back and looking at it is that it's very common in just Shanghai and Beijing, but not in Washington, D.C. or Taipei or Hong Kong or Singapore, to use symbols of a skyline in the advertisements. And so it's even common in an instant noodle ad in Beijing. We'll have a picture of the skyline, okay? And so there's something going on in Beijing and in Shanghai that it feels that it's become part of it, just a symbol, a visual symbol you include in many of the advertisements. Conversely, in Hong Kong, you almost never see an ad of the skyline in Hong Kong itself, which actually is kind of perhaps good verification of Akbar Abbas's argument about the politics of disappearance in Hong Kong, right? How there's a disappearance of public spaces and the public and a view of ourself. And he talks about that in film and in literature and in architecture. But actually it bears up in the advertisements too. You very rarely see a picture of Hong Kong in an ad from Hong Kong. But in Shanghai and Beijing, it's all over the place, okay? And they're constantly contesting about which buildings, for example, are the iconic buildings in Shanghai. Washington, D.C. also has the equivalent in Washington. This is an ad run by Virginia Republicans, actually, who are disagreeing. They're asking people to vote against certain people. So it's called the Virginia's Most Wanted. So it was an election year. This is also a very common category: civil behavior, norms, families. And this is a whole string of, these are called, kind of excellent public service ads from different parts of China that have been collected. And so this is asking us, before you go out for a night in the town, think about who you're leaving behind. Okay, so you can see there's a woman with a diamond earring or something, and who's that in behind? Oh, that's grandma, left behind in the doorway. Okay, and there's a whole series of ads like these. There's a whole series of ads like this where it's women leaving behind elderly relatives. You don't see men leaving behind elderly relatives, but you do see women leaving behind elderly relatives. And there's a lot of ones like this too. They're just norms of civility in these public spaces. These are very common. This is traffic safety. One of the interesting things very recently I've noticed looking at 2010 in Taipei is that maybe a quarter of all the ads are about traffic safety, about drive your car in a good way, drive your motorcycle in a good way. And so it's really odd. They're telling people in the subway how to drive. Okay, and so there's an interesting crossover effect that needs to be studied. And then, of course, there's this one. You know, it looks like a shopping ad or something to go to a shopping mall, but it's a security one, right? You know, be aware of dangerous bags that people have left in the subways. Environment and advertising. So this is one about, use less electricity. Basically, it's like saving money. And this one actually came out several years ago, right? But how prescient for this year, right? And it's this group called Oceana. And this is actually very common in Washington, D.C., is to have a public service ad paid for by a citizen group or an NGO. You get a fair number of them in Hong Kong, a few in Taipei, but almost none in Beijing and Shanghai. Not yet. You also get this. This is another public service ad telling people that coal is actually really clean and efficient, and it really is the best source of energy. And so this is by a coalition of coal companies. And so you actually have companies advertising public service issues in Washington, D.C. We don't see any in China or any of the other cities we're looking at. And then finally, this is very rare, but actually the German government must have paid for this. That's my guess. I don't think it was the American government who paid for it, but it's friendship between Germany and the United States. So occasionally there are international kind of cosmopolitan ads like this. And so that's actually kind of the comparison between Shanghai and DC. What does it show us? First of all, Shanghai has more commercial ads directed at individuals and families. It's a much more commercialized space than Washington, DC. DC has a lot more commercial ads that are directed at corporations and governments, not at individuals. Part of that might just be the ridership. And one of the things we're doing this year is to do a similar ad in New York City and compare and see if New York is more like Shanghai, for example. That would be our intuition. And finally, Shanghai public service ads are produced by governments. And DC has public service ads from governments, NGOs, and companies. It's a much wider range of issues as well. What we're also finding is that this is kind of borne up with our previous studies, that advertisements, and commercially especially, ask people to think of themselves as members of localities, nations, and transnational groups. And we found this in all of the cities that we looked at. So I'll just give you some examples. This is a very clear one. This is Toyota Corolla. So in the morning it said this is New York, right? And here's Paris. And the next ad next to it has, this is Sydney, and this is Shanghai, right? And the idea is, if you're in Shanghai, is that you need a Toyota Corolla, because that's what people in Sydney and New York and Paris have. And since Shanghai is just as cosmopolitan, we also need a Toyota Corolla. I think that's the implication. So you really have multinational corporations telling people to think of themselves as this type of transnational middle class. So there is the idea of this type of consumer citizenship. This one is also clear, I think, as well. For Citizen Watch, and here you have what looks like a young, probably Chinese woman, right, standing. My guess is she's at a wedding. Maybe she's going to catch the bouquet, right? She's at a wedding somewhere, but where is that wedding? Okay, I don't think that's Pudong. It's probably Europe, right, or America or something. So it's kind of the idea that you have friends who are getting married overseas, and you go and you celebrate. So it's the idea of the transnational tourist, that pops up in a lot of ads. And certainly, if you can afford a Citizen Watch, you probably can go to be one of these tourists. But you also see this in Washington, D.C. And so here's Johns Hopkins has an MBA program. It says, whether you work in Washington or London, your competition is global. Your MBA should be too. So it's reflecting the fact that you study part-time in DC, and then you also study part-time in London. Okay, so you need to be a transnational professional too. So we do see those occurring as well. One of the things we're going to need to do in the future is do more surveys asking people what they think about about these subway stations. We're also, I think, interested in some very specific issues of feminism, militarization, I think, are some obvious things we could look at. The intersection or bleed over between commercial and public service ads, in particular the use of political symbols, is something we should look at, but then also do much more broader studies. And so we've already started. You may have seen outside the slideshow of the ads that we're doing. I can also just kind of throw this up really quickly. We've already started to analyze a little bit between Shanghai, Beijing, Nanjing, Hong Kong, Taipei, and DC, and you can see there's big variation in all of these. One of the things you can see, for example, in the political patriotic ads, this is Beijing in 2009. About 20% of all ads were about that. And why was that, 2009? Well, it's the 60th anniversary, right, of the founding republic. And if we did Shanghai for 2010, it probably about 25% of the ads would be for the expo, okay? And so what we find is that cities do respond to specific types of events. So a lot of this can be very event specific as well. That's something to keep in mind. What we kind of found overall, looking at all these cities, about 15 to 25% of the ads are public service ads, ask people to think of themselves as good local or national citizens who can solve problems created by globalization. But very few advertisements actually ask people to think of themselves as global citizens. So we have Toyota, multinational companies, asking people to think of themselves as transnational consumers, but we don't actually have any ads asking people to think of themselves as global citizens. We have very few of those. You know, some of them, maybe like the World Wildlife Fund, for example, or some of the energy and conservation ones might say, you know, we need to protect the planet, and it's your duty as a human to protect the planet. There are a few ads like that, but there are actually very few asking people to solve a lot of public problems that are as transnational. So we're consuming, we're told to consume transnationally, but we're not actually told to work to solve problems or lower our consumption transnationally. So that, I think, is one of the issues. I won't go into it, but I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done here on kind of global public diplomacy, and maybe thinking about how nations should maybe start thinking about how a lot of countries require that 10% of the ads or so should be set aside for public service ads already. And that's true for the United States, for China, for almost all of these countries. And so one of the things that maybe should be talked about would be, can we take those ads and make them into truly transnational or international public service ads and have them created by international organizations or something like that. But there hasn't been a lot of talk about that. And that's one thing I think that we're at the Baker Institute we're going to try and do. Let me just talk a little bit about the future project that we're doing part of the archive. And this is, these are the ads surveys we've done to date. And you can see the ones in red are the ones already included in our prototype archive. And Geneva Henry had kind of briefly introduced it, so I won't go into it. But the archive right now has 1998 to 2003. And we just found out under our software with Ying Jean, where is she? Here, she's here somewhere. There she is, in the back, quietly in the back. She's the person who's helping us to actually introduce Chinese characters into it. Okay, so now we can actually, we've actually transcribed and translated. Where's Wen Xing? There she is, in the back there. She's been the one going through all of these thousands of files and translating and transcribing them. So in the future, we'll be able to, probably by the end of this year, we're hoping or so, we can actually do 1998 to 2003 and 2009, and you'll be able to keyword search. So if you want to type in socialism, it'll pop up all the ads that mention the word socialism. When you type in Adidas, it'll pop it up. Right now, you can type in English Adidas, and it'll pop up all of those ads in Singapore and Hong Kong and Beijing, whatever, that actually sell Adidas. So to be able to do that, I think will be really, really helpful. So the ones that are in red were currently included in our archive, but over the years, we've picked up a lot of different ones. You know, sometimes it was somewhere I was traveling, or it's just we had students who were going somewhere. And so we thought that if we really want to make it more broadly comparative, let's step outside and look at all the ads you know, in other parts of the world. So this year in 2010, we're actually paying students and hiring other people to add in all these other cities, subway systems in other cities. So there's only one in Africa, Cairo. And then the Americas, we've got 5 cities. Asia, we've got 15 cities, okay? So we're covering most of the cities we've already done before, but then a lot of other ones as well. And Europe, I think we can actually get about 11 cities as well. And what do we expect to find? We expect to find significant variation. I mean, just looking at it, what has already come in, for example, I'm already surprised to see some very interesting things. We see, for example, products that are very, very common in some subway systems, but are not common at all in others. So Buenos Aires, books are a big thing. People in Buenos Aires read lots of books, apparently. In this way, you rarely see ads for books in many other subway systems. The other thing we found, for example, in Helsinki, there are very few public service ads. But there are many public service ads in most Asian cities. So we've also can find very specific ones. So if you want, we'll be able to compare, for example, H1N1, advertisements, AIDS awareness advertisements, safety advertisements across all of these societies for the first time. And so this is done with, these are all some of the people who are helping out with that. We've got a small army of field researchers going out to all corners of the globe. And these are the people who actually worked on our past subway. There's about another 13 people. There's about 30 people this year, and probably 13 people working on it in the past. And then I've also used our TCP research interns. Wenxing and Arthur Yen have been the ones who've done the lion's share of the work over the years. Also, a lot of people have given us feedback, and also our donors who've also helped us with it. So that's actually the future project, is to extend it to other parts of the world, but then also to continue to study. And like I said, once we have it in an archive, we can continue to look at some of the things that we think are really important. In my case, it's global public diplomacy. But hopefully it'll be a project where it'll be an archive where scholars who are looking at completely different issues and coming at it from very different disciplinary backgrounds can actually use it to study what they want. So, okay, well, thank you. Maybe we have a few minutes if you have any questions about what I gave in my presentation or to any of the presenters. Does anybody have any questions? Sure.
I have a question about the PSA. Since 1990s, the Chinese government has some kind of a regulation that a percentage of the advertising space and air has to be allocated for public service announcements. And I've seen a few cases that the commercial companies actually use the public service announcement to promote their products.
Yes. Yeah.
So I just wonder, how dominant do you find this?
Actually, when we did a survey of outdoor political ads and public service ads from the late '90s, and we saw a lot of those, partly privatized ones. So it'd be, here's one advertising, if you're in trouble, go to the PlayStation, and it's got Coca-Cola there. There's a lot of these types of piggybacking, or Pepsi, don't step on the flowers. That type of thing. But we actually don't see as many of that anymore. More common is actually to see the way the different subway systems put the public service ads. It's very interesting to watch, and year to year it varies. So I noticed, for example, I got off at one station in Shanghai by accident because it's not a very popular station. I got off there by accident, and I looked, and all of the ads were public service ads. And so obviously they were counting the whole line. And so they just stuck them in the middle of nowhere. The same way that broadcast people in the United States will have all those public service ads at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and 4. If you sit there, if you watched American society television from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., you would think, what a wonderful society. They're dealing with all these things. It's the same thing if you got off at that one subway station in Shanghai. It's more common in Taipei, for example. They push all of the public service ads at the front of the train and the back of the train. And so in the middle, they probably have them priced out. The middle are almost always Uni-President, the very large beverage and food company. And so there's other ways to do that, to try and marginalize them. And what's interesting about that, too, if you know from studies of subway riders, and I also recommend, there's a book by Haruki Murakami called Underground, and it's actually about it's interviews with the survivors of the sarin gas attacks of 1995. And he also interviews a few of the people who committed it. But it's also dealing with kind of the whole psychology of it. And what he shows us is that when people ride the subways, especially one as clean and efficient as the Japanese one, they privatize the space such that they show up at the same station the exact same time every day. They stand next to this pillar. Okay, they wait, they get on the train, and they sit in the exact same spot every time that they actually do that. And so people actually very much, personalize it. And the problem with that was the whole psychology of it was that people were just devastated psychologically because it was depending upon where you were in one of those cars determined whether you lived or not. So somebody put down the gas, attacked the gas bag, and as the train moved forward, everybody who was downwind died. And everybody's like 2 feet ahead of that, everybody was fine. And so all of the people who were in the subway at that time had to reorient themselves psychologically and think, why did I take that train every day? Why was I late that day? Why was I early that day? Why do I always sit in the same spot? So what's interesting is that people really do tend to personalize these very public spaces. And that's an aspect of it that I think we don't really quite understand. But it definitely creates some type of emotional connection to these actual spaces. Any question? Yeah.
I want to make a comment on the Toyota advertisement. You argue that it is kind of the commercial advertisement is advocating the global citizen concept. But I'm afraid there are another deeper implication in that advertisement because I felt like not only foreign companies but also Chinese companies has a long tradition of using foreign settings or foreign pieces in advertising their products because they kind of appeal to people's psychology of imagining themselves in another country or in a Western, that kind of psychology. So that has been a long tradition. And I felt like it's kind of it's very popular in the 1990s and at the beginning of the new century. But as it's approaching, the time passed, nowadays,
you don't think it's as common?
It's not that common as before.
We can test that. That's one of the things. We can actually look at that, in the subway. It'd be interesting to do.
Began to use Chinese faces in advertising. And for me, if you go to those rural areas in China, some suburban areas of cities or villages, you see some brands that you never see on the shelves in the cities. And they still use those foreign faces. Western settings to advertise their products, but that's not prevailing in the products that is popular in cities.
I think that brings up, again, Hongwei's point that there really is a big difference between the cities and the countryside. And that is one of the problems of this project is that we are looking at an elite population. That is definitely true. That's right. That's absolutely true.
I'm wondering if, as advertisers decide to become more video-oriented, I'm wondering if it's possible to collect video advertisements, like the Starbucks introduction of Frappuccinos.
I think are you talking about the ones that are like on the web or on or just the ones that are actually on screens inside of we tried to do that and one of the problems I think we're going to have with that is all the different video systems and the frequencies and everything makes it actually hard to do, but we've tried to collect them. But that actually raises the next question, which is they are moving towards LCD displays for the advertisements. And it probably at some point it'll be possible to just change those instantly, and maybe even have them such that they react to the people walking by, because right now we have it such that you can allow the cell phone company to know where you are, right? So if you go into a shopping mall, right, supposedly you're walking past the Gap at the Galleria Mall, and it sends you a little text message, of something like, hey, there's 20% off at the Gap. They're already allowing that, and if people are willing to do that, it'd be easy to actually have the ads themselves respond and change to the people actually walking by, just like the movie Minority Report. The technology is definitely there. Any other question? Yeah.
Commonly in China, we consider Beijing served as a political center and Shanghai as economic center. So in the first part of your presentation, why don't you compare the Shanghai with New York or Beijing with Washington DC?
Beijing, Washington. That's our next step of the research, It's just because it's convenient to do, I don't go to New York as much. Actually, but I go to DC a lot, actually, so. But we will do that.
As the only Nanjing native here, I'm very happy to see that Nanjing, this nobody city, all of a sudden rises among the star cities all over the world, just because of your subway research. Now, could you please tell me why Nanjing?
Why we included Nanjing?
Yes.
Actually, we thought it was very important to include Nanjing because it's a new subway system. For exactly that reason.
Is that the fourth system in China?
It's the fourth one that we included in our survey, and that's why we included it, because it was new. And I think we saw pretty clearly that people were very excited about it. And it actually reminds me of Anru's research talking about the Taipei and Martimol about 10 or 15 years ago. You're talking about how excited people were about the new system. So I think the surveys are right. That people have, it changes over time. And if you think about it, there's also a lot of people who've written about the way that once you build them, subway systems become an instant symbol of people's happiness or unhappiness. And so think about all of the stories and the movies and popular media description of the New York City subway in the 1970s and 80s. The film The Warriors, and so it's known as this really dark, dangerous place that's really, really scary. And so you can see that, it can be, so far Taipei is actually a symbol of modernity, and people are happy with it such that they think that the rest of the city needs to be like the subway. But you can imagine that if if they don't pay the police, if maybe Taipei will become a crime place, it could turn the opposite just as easily. And so I think that's the history of other subway systems suggests that is possible. But you had another question.
Yes, may I just add one more point here? Because Nanjing, judging from what I heard of back in Nanjing this summer, people commented Nanjing didn't really need a subway. So this subway there has a very different function from the other cities. This answers what Professor Shen asked. Why everybody reading on the subway? Why? I meant to say, of course, Nanjing people are more cultural than
That's, well, of course.
But I take this back. In fact, the people who take subway may be more cultural. Because these are people, they are spending leisure lives on subway. I hope that you could put this in.
And that's another aspect, as I mentioned, that's why I think the DC one is really useful, because it's so unusual. The ridership is so many federal employees, and in particular military people, riding it, then so many tourists. That's a very unusual population. Okay, maybe one more question in the back?
Yeah, my question is for Zoe, actually.
Okay.
I missed the part at the beginning of her presentation.
Questions for you.
Sorry. Yeah, so do you have questions about commuting patterns of these citizens? Because I think there's a relationship between their commuting patterns and the target group, the commercials.
I think in this survey we didn't relate to so many such kind of questions to give a whole picture of their different, commuter patterns. There are maybe what kind of percentage they use more of the metro system, or maybe more prefer the private vehicles, just to take the city bus. Actually, we didn't do another survey. It's correct, and we've done the, we call it some mobility index research in China, and it's also maybe we can talk to later, and you can also find the data, because we're already leading the the findings through internet, so you can find it very easily. Yes.
The other question is that I think you may want to ask the stress level, the identity, the self-identify the stress level of the citizens, because I think it has some relationship to do with their tastes and their preferences.
Yes.
Yes.
All good questions, good points. Well, we can probably continue our discussion, actually, but probably go ahead and end the formal session. Thank you very much for our presenters. And for being a wonderful audience, both here and via webcam. So, thanks a lot. Thank you. Oh, and also, as I mentioned before, if you like the really spiffy poster, feel free to take a poster. We set them outside in the hallway, so. Well, thanks. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks for helping us. Yeah.